This man has been operating an unauthorized gathering in direct violation of Oak Creek Estates community standards. I warned him repeatedly. I gave him multiple notices, and he ignored every single one of them. He also deliberately excluded me from this event. Homeowners Association President Margaret Kensington showed up at the front door of 18 Whispering Pines Court. She told the homeowner that private residential gatherings were strictly prohibited under Oak Creek Estates community standards. She claimed a $5,000 fine had been placed against his deed for proceeding with party preparations without board authorization. She said the only way she would consider withdrawing the fine and allowing the event to proceed was under one condition. He had to provide her with a personal invitation that included reserved seating, a dedicated host, and treatment she described as befitting her position in the community. She said it like it was a completely reasonable administrative request. What she didn't know was that the homeowner had been recording every conversation since her first threat. The HOA handbook contained absolutely no prohibition on residential gatherings of any kind. The false police report she was about to file was going to become a serious criminal matter in its own right. The restraining order being prepared against her was going to be the most public ending to an HOA presidency anyone in DuPage County had ever witnessed. Julian Hayes, 37, a marketing director for a mid-sized retail brand based out of Chicago, had lived at 18 Whispering Pines Court. He had been in the Oak Creek Estates subdivision of Naperville, Illinois, for exactly 3 years. Oak Creek Estates sat in DuPage County. It was a middle-class neighborhood of brickfront homes and tree-lined streets. It was the kind of community where weekend barbecues and front porch conversations were simply part of the fabric of the place. Julian had bought his home after years of apartment living. He had spent his first 2 years getting to know his neighbors well enough to consider most of them genuine friends. He was sociable, organized, and the kind of person who did things by the book. He had been planning the party for 6 weeks. It was a milestone birthday celebration for his closest friends and neighbors. It was catered with a playlist he had curated himself and a back patio he had strung with lights the weekend before. Before he sent a single invitation, he did what any responsible homeowner would do. He walked to the Oak Creek Estates HOA office on Whispering Pines Court and asked whether there were any community guidelines he needed to follow for a private gathering. The woman behind the desk was Margaret Kensington. Margaret, 55, had been HOA president of Oak Creek Estates for 8 consecutive years. She had developed a particular reputation among residents for finding problems where absolutely none existed. She also found solutions that always seemed to benefit her personally. She told Julian that private parties were prohibited in Oak Creek Estates. She claimed it was a community standard designed to protect residents from noise and disruption. She told him he would need to cancel his plans immediately or face formal enforcement action. Julian thanked her, went home, and pulled out the Oak Creek Estates HOA handbook that had been in his file since closing day. He read every single page that evening. There was no prohibition on private residential gatherings anywhere in the document. Not a clause, not a footnote, not a single sentence. He ordered the catering the following morning. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe that a homeowner has every right to host a party in his own home without needing permission, hit that like and subscribe button and join us here on Karen Conflict. Margaret did not take the news that Julian was continuing his preparations quietly. She showed up at 18 Whispering Pines Court 3 days after their first conversation. She handed him a formal violation notice, citing his party preparations as a community disturbance. She cited what she called Oak Creek Estates residential conduct standards. The fine was $1,200. Julian photographed the notice, opened the HOA handbook to the table of contents, and spent 10 minutes confirming once again that no such standard existed anywhere in the document. He put the notice in a folder and went back to finalizing his guest list. The second notice arrived 4 days later. This one cited the string lights he had hung on his back patio as an unapproved exterior modification. She cited Section 3.5 of the Oak Creek Estates Architectural Guidelines. Julian pulled up Section 3.5 and found it covered permanent structural additions to the exterior of a home. String lights on a patio for a single weekend event were not a permanent structural addition by any reasonable reading of that language. He added the notice to his folder. Margaret came to his door a third time the following week, and this time she dropped the administrative language entirely. She told Julian directly that she had the authority to have his event shut down by law enforcement on the night it occurred. She said the only way she would stand down was if he gave her what she called a proper personal invitation. She described what that meant in very specific terms. It required reserved parking right at the front of his driveway. It also included a dedicated seat at the best table, personal acknowledgement from Julian throughout the evening, and a gift bag prepared specifically for her. She said it with the expectation of someone who believed she was offering him a reasonable deal. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her he would think about it and closed the door. He immediately called his attorney and described the conversation in full. His attorney told him to document absolutely everything going forward. He needed to record every interaction, every notice, and every word. His attorney stated that what Margaret had just described constituted an abuse of HOA authority. It crossed into potential extortion territory depending on how far she was willing to take it. Julian started recording every interaction from that day forward. He did not send Margaret an invitation of any kind. The fines kept coming through the following 2 weeks. There was a noise pre-violation issued before the party had even taken place. There was a parking notice for vehicles belonging to his caterers who were making a single delivery. There was also a letter on HOA letterhead warning that law enforcement would be contacted on the night of the event if the gathering proceeded without board authorization. The accumulated fines against his deed had reached $5,000, and Margaret had begun referencing lien proceedings in her most recent correspondence. Julian paid nothing, canceled nothing, and uninvited nobody. He confirmed his catering order and finalized the playlist. He sent a follow-up message to his guests with the start time and parking details. He also installed 2 additional outdoor cameras covering his driveway and the street in front of his property. This was not because he was worried about the party itself. He wanted a clear record of anything that happened outside his home on the night Margaret had promised to send the police. His neighbors on both sides of Whispering Pines Court had been invited to the party. 3 neighbors across the street had also been invited. The only person on the block who had not received an invitation was Margaret Kensington. She had spent 2 weeks making sure Julian understood exactly how she felt about that. The night of the party arrived on a beautiful Saturday in October. Julian's home was lit up, the music was at a neighborly volume, and 40 guests were enjoying themselves in the back garden and on the patio. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then the police arrived. 2 DuPage County police officers pulled up to 18 Whispering Pines Court at 9:47 p.m. Julian saw the headlights from the back patio and walked around to the front of the house to meet them before they knocked. He was calm and unhurried. He had been expecting this since the exact moment Margaret promised it would happen. He introduced himself at the front door, told the officers he was the homeowner, and invited them in without hesitation. The officers explained that they had received a call reporting suspicious activities and noise violations at the address. Julian nodded, opened the door wider, and gestured for them to look around. They walked through the house and stepped out onto the back patio. They looked at 40 people eating, talking, and listening to music at a volume the neighbors on both sides had not once complained about. The officers then looked at each other. One officer checked the decibel reading on his department device. It came in well below the DuPage County noise ordinance threshold. The other officer walked the perimeter of the property and found nothing that constituted a violation of any kind. They were back at the front door within 12 minutes. Julian handed the senior officer a printed copy of the Oak Creek Estates HOA handbook open to the table of contents. He asked him to identify any section prohibiting private residential gatherings. The officer looked at it for a moment and handed it back without comment. Julian then showed him the recordings of Margaret's demand for a special invitation as the absolute condition for allowing the party to proceed. The officer's expression did not change, but he wrote something in his notepad that took longer than a single sentence. The officers thanked Julian, returned to their cruiser, and drove away at 10:01 p.m. The party continued without interruption for another 2 hours. Across the street, Margaret Kensington had been watching from her front window since the cruiser arrived. She watched it leave. She watched Julian's patio stay lit. She watched his guests continue laughing, and she heard the music keep playing. She understood in that exact moment that it had not worked. Julian was already drafting the restraining order application before the last guest left. Julian filed the restraining order application with the DuPage County Circuit Court the following Monday morning. His attorney submitted it with a comprehensive supporting package. It included every single violation notice Margaret had issued. It included the recordings of her special invitation demand. It had the documented timeline connecting each fine to his refusal to comply with her personal requests. It also had the police report from the night of the party confirming no violations were found at 18 Whispering Pines Court. The court reviewed the application and granted the restraining order within the week. Margaret Kensington was formally prohibited from contacting Julian, approaching his property, or communicating with him through any channel, including HOA correspondence. The false police report became a separate matter entirely. Filing a knowingly false report with law enforcement is a misdemeanor under Illinois Compiled Statutes 720 ILCS 526-1. The responding officers had already noted in their incident report that the call did not match conditions found at the address. The DuPage County State's Attorney's Office reviewed the report and opened a formal inquiry into the filing. Margaret's personal attorney advised her to stop making public statements immediately. The Oak Creek Estates HOA board called an emergency meeting 3 days later. They removed Margaret from the presidency unanimously. They commissioned a full review of every enforcement action she had taken during her 8-year tenure. They found a massive pattern of fabricated violations issued against residents. These violations were issued against people who had declined her personal requests or challenged her authority publicly. 4 residents filed their own complaints in the months that followed. The $5,000 in fines Margaret had accumulated against Julian's deed were declared unenforceable and dismissed. She was also ordered to pay his legal fees. The financial and legal consequences of everything she had set in motion over a party invitation drained her resources much faster than she had ever prepared for. Julian Hayes hosted another party at 18 Whispering Pines Court the following summer. It featured the same patio, the same lights, and the same music. He did not ask anyone's permission, and he certainly did not send a special invitation to anyone who had not earned one. If this story reminded you that the best response to someone who tries to use a title as a personal bargaining chip is to document everything and let the courts handle the rest, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have ever been threatened, fined, or pressured by an HOA president who made community rules feel like personal favors, drop your story in the comments. We are always listening. See you on the next one, right here on Karen Conflict.